Free Speech Ireland is an organisation established to preserve the continually guaranteed right to freedom of speech and expression. Alexander Sheridan is the director of Free Speech Ireland, and he took time to speak to me recently about Free Speech Ireland and the hate speech bill currently making its way through the Oireachtas. I started by asking him to explain the background of Free Speech Ireland and its focus and its vision.
So the organization was started in 2018 by students from University College Cork. These students would have been formerly associated with Young Fine Gael, and it used to be solely a student organization, and that was set up by a gentleman called Brian O'Shea, generally in response to debates and talks which they wanted to put on in the college weren't happening. They were being shut down by students before they could even book out a room, that sort of thing. It has since grown to be more than just students, and we thought with the hate speech bill coming in, why don't we use the name and brand of Free Speech Ireland to try fight it on a more national stage? So we have been setting up meetings around the country, the biggest of which was in Wynn's Hotel in December. And that drew over 150 guests, to which we invited and hosted Senator Sharon Keoghan, Matt McGrath TD, Ian O'Doherty from the Irish Independent, and Professor Jared Casey of UCD. We've also helped or co-hosted events in UCD, to which we had speakers attend, and we've taken a sole focus on combating the hate speech bill in the past year.
Is this proposed hate speech legislation really as bad as some say it is, or is all this controversy just storm in a teacup?
We think it's pretty bad. Now, it is important to note that you can't get all your information off Twitter. So we're noticing things on Twitter. People reply to some of our statements and whatnot, and they go, Section 10, which we believe is the most problematic. This is the section which says the possession of so-called hateful material is prosecutable, and you could end up in prison for 2 years. You have people posting underneath that going, well, what about religious texts like the Bible or the Quran or whatnot? It doesn't apply to that. There actually are caveats in the bill which do say that genuine and reasonable contributions to religious, political, and historical debate are allowed. But the issue here is the section that defines what is reasonable or genuine. It doesn't really define it at all. That would be Section 7, I believe. And it's basically up to the judge to decide, is it reasonable or a genuine contribution? So that sort of thing makes it a little bit awkward. Section 10 is something that kind of makes us a bit worried. But in regards to it not really getting enough coverage, the whole process of this started in 2019 when Charlie Flanagan was Justice Minister. And this has been something which they've been teasing Fine Gael for the last 10 years or so, usually results in terrible backlash from the public because in principle, it's not a good idea to put limits on free speech at all. It's not Irish. We don't generally like it. And there was 4,000 responses to the public consultation which Charlie Flanagan opened up. All of these can be found online. And we're starting to see now that it's being picked up by the Irish media and they're starting to cover it. They're trying to pretend as if the government was uh, in close contact with the public over this hate speech bill, saying that, well, we got 4,000 responses to the public consultation. They neglect to mention, though, that of those 4,000 responses, the vast majority were overwhelmingly negative at the suggestion of bringing in hate speech laws. So, other than that, we haven't really seen much communication from the government. And you get an odd article here or there over the last, 4 years or so mentioning the incoming legislation, but not really getting that much else from the Irish mainstream media.
It's not just Ireland which is introducing hate speech laws. Of course, numerous countries across the EU have been introducing such laws in recent years. Could there be said to be a central push for such legislation from the EU Commission?
Yeah, it's no coincidence in the fact that I guess people know that there's been a cultural shift in the developed and Western world of the last few years. I'll put it down to that. I do see some people they'll post on the internet saying that this is amounting to it's basically an EU directive forcing Ireland to have hate speech laws. It's not. There are some guidance on bringing forth hate speech laws, but there's by no means any there's no be an EU forcing us to have this. This isn't like I think we had like a communications act brought in there under which Ireland was being fined by the EU every day for not having certain regulations or communications. This is not the case with the hate speech bill. The hate speech bill is, I think, more of a result of lobbying by various groups who are funded by the EU or some, say, anti-racist organizations, just kind of anti-discrimination organizations who think that the best way of protecting the people that they represent is to bring in such hate speech laws. The only coincidence I'd say that's come to Ireland after seeing it being brought into the UK and being brought into other countries is this just seems to be the way the cultural shift has gone in the last few years. Much more of calls for censorship and whatnot.
The bill at this moment in time is at stage 7 of the 10-stage process of being passed into law, and our president does have the power to refuse to sign it into law if he feels it is going against our constitution. The question is, does this bill contradict anything in our constitution?
So our constitution specifically protects freedom of expression, not actually freedom of speech. So there is a possibility that it could be divided in the Supreme Court, possibly even defeated. We do actually have in our constitution lines which say that censorship is okay in certain circumstances, but these are generally to do with inciting violence or inciting sedition against the state, undermining the authority of the state or inciting violence. There's nothing really there to inciting hatred. So that will probably be the best grounds to fight it if it does come to the Supreme Court, and that will be the argument that we try to make. However, I do see a lot of people are trying to write off the bill as going through the Shannon as basically a rubber stamp process that's just going to be approved. I don't believe so. So the Shannon, even though it cannot reject the bill, it cannot veto it. It can delay the bill up to a few months, but it can also put forth new amendments. Now, it can't do the exact same amendments that People Before Profit put forward in the Dáil vote on Wednesday, just prior to the Dáil vote, but they can, for lack of a better word, sort of water down this bill and take a little bit of the teeth out of it. And that's where we're in close communication with Senator Ronan Mullen and Senator Sharon Keoghan, and we're trying to lobby a few others and get a few heads thinking together on what can we do to make this bill less extreme.
The bill has at this point passed through the Dáil and is now at the Shannon stage. How many politicians are voicing opposition to this bill?
Yeah, so you've even seen on Twitter, you've had Senator Keoghan and Senator Mullen. They've spoken up saying that they intend to combat this bill in the Shannon or do something to change it. Mullen, I think he said it's heavily flawed legislation, so they will have to review it. I have seen some responses from other senators who people have been reaching out to via email because after hearing about the bill passing the Dáil, naturally a lot of people on the internet were very confused and quite alarmed. Like I say, there's some confident. Some emails are not making me confident that we're getting in response. We've noticed that some Sinn Féin senators will send back an email which seems to be virtually the same as the email we've been getting back from them since we were consulting them about the bill, including to all members months ago in October. Seems to be kind of a copy and paste response which says, we are not against the principle of hate speech laws. However, we believe the law is flawed and it needs to be amended. The government bill is flawed and need to be amended. So that says to me that some of the senators within the Shannon aren't really interested in what this bill has to say and how it can affect Irish society. However, if they do think that the bill is flawed, if amendments are brought forth by Senator Mullen and Keoghan, hopefully we can push some opposition senators to vote with that. So when the bill does get returned to the Dáil for final debate, there's something different in there, and it's not the bill as I see it now. The bill as we see it now has no amendments. It's as it was written when it was presented to Dáil by Justice Minister Helen McAtee back in October.
So we have, from what I can gather, three possibilities for this bill being blocked or at the very least being modified. The first is for politicians to seek and demand to be changed. The second is for the President to refer to the Supreme Court for judgment. And the third is for the people of Ireland to protest, peacefully, of course, that is, to protest loud enough for the media and the politicians who support this bill as it stands to sit up and take notice. I remember the protests that took place in Dublin when people converged in the capital to protest against the government's plan to abolish entitlements to the medical card. And indeed, protests that took place over the establishment of Irish water and people being made to pay for water. These were two protests that caused the government to very much sit up and take notice and indeed change its mind. But Irish people, we do not protest that much, definitely not as much as the French protest. Why is this? Why don't we as a people get out there and shout that there's a problem? Of course, peacefully all that is. Is there any hope of the Irish people taking to the streets? Of course, as I say, and continually peacefully. Is there any hope of them taking to the streets demanding that this bill be changed? Is it that the Irish don't like to protest, or is it that we just lost hope in the power of protesting?
I think it's a bit of both. Irish people, we don't protest like the French. I don't think we like it. I always like to think. I think sometimes it can be counterproductive if you were to protest like the French, which often, devolves into violence and petty vandalism. The Irish, it's never a good idea for that to happen. To protest heavily. I don't know if you remember back during the lockdown, there was a demonstration where some young man fired a firework into a crowd of police, and the whole of Ireland condemned that, which is nothing compared to what they do in France, where you'd see multiple cars being burnt and petrol bombs thrown everywhere. So it probably is a combination of Irish people aren't really into protesting, but there has been a severe lack of information presented to the public by the media. For example, in the weeks coming up to this bill, I don't think anyone knew about it. I don't think anyone knew about the final stage of the Dáil debate. We get an automatic email update from Oireachtas.ie about the Dáil schedule every day. And the first that we heard about the final stage of this bill in the Dáil was literally the day before the vote. We can see that this might have even been the case with some parties in the Dáil, that only the day before did People for Profit submit any amendments to the bill. And then when the debate came prior to the vote, only four TDs were present to debate the bill. When the actual vote came, 30 TDs were not present. So this shows that not only is there a lack of information being presented to the Irish public about the bill, but also some of the TDs themselves and some Oireachtas members. So it really does feel like this bill was, for lack of a better phrase or term, kind of slipped in under our noses, and maybe deliberately.
The possibility of this bill not being signed into law by the president, but instead being sent to the Supreme Court for analysis. What input could organisations like Free Speech Ireland, who have serious concerns about this bill, have in the whole process?
We do is probably get some legal opinions in Free Speech Ireland. We are speaking with some senators and some friendly TDs over how we are going to go about this. It probably be a case where a legal representative will present an argument to the Supreme Court justices, and the judges of the Supreme Court will be able to discuss among themselves and decide whether it's valid or not. Sometimes, however, when the Supreme Court in Ireland rejects a bill or legislation which is unconstitutional, they will make recommendations to what can be changed about it. So you could see something happen like they don't like Section 10, the possession of hateful material, and they'll refer it back to the Dáil to the bill again, vote on it, but just remove sections which are considered unconstitutional. This happened most recently with the trade deal with Canada. I think it was back in October. The Supreme Court found it to be unconstitutional and referred it back to the Dáil to make amendments.
Where can people find more information about what is happening with this bill and indeed the workings and operations of Free Speech Ireland?
Let's say come onto our website. Well, it's on our website. We have a mailing list. So our website is freespeechireland.ie. We're also on Twitter. Our Twitter account was responded to by Mr. Elon Musk there and Jordan Peterson, among others. So starting to become one of the more prominent voices against this bill online. If you're thinking of joining any protests and whatnot, unfortunately, Free Speech Ireland is not really what we do, but we understand that there are a few other organizations who are trying to organize protests against the bill in future. What we implore people to do is to call your local senator and your senator who might represent your alma mater. If you can't get through to them on the phone, send them an email and do it as many times as you can. If you can't get through to them today, call them again tomorrow. It's their job to listen to your deep concerns about this bill.
Alexander Sheridan, Director of Free Speech Ireland, thank you for taking time to speak to me today.
Thank you very much for having me, Arthur.
This is 93.1 Life FM.